If you asked anyone at Hyosan High who Jin Young was, they'd laugh before they answered.
Did you see him?
And that was the problem, because no one ever noticed the moment he
Must
stopped
have been late
laughing
for
with them.
breakfast.
At Hyosan High, people were remembered for specific reasons. Some were remembered because they were rich, some because they were beautiful, some because they were loud enough to make hallways bend around them. Jin Young was remembered because he was easy to laugh at. He knew it before he reached the school gate each morning. He knew it from the way eyes moved over him, quick and careless, the way you glance at furniture. He knew it from boys who lowered their voices as he passed, then laughed only after he was far enough away. He knew it from the girls who pretended not to stare, and from teachers who called him quiet like it was a personality trait instead of a survival strategy. He was 16 years old, slightly heavy, with a face that hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. He walked with his bag held close to his side, taking up the least possible space, a habit so old he no longer noticed he was doing it. Not too fast. Not too slow. Too fast meant fear. Too slow meant confidence. He had learned to find something in between. Near the entrance, two boys leaned against the wall sharing a drink. One of them looked up. "Careful," the boy said. "The ground's shaking." The other laughed into his drink. Jin Young kept walking. That was the first rule. Don't stop. The second rule, don't look hurt. By the time he reached his classroom, the muscles in his jaw already felt tired from maintaining an expression that said nothing was happening. He took his usual seat near the back, close enough to hear the lesson, far enough to be forgotten. When the teacher asked a question, Jin Young already had the answer before anyone else opened their notebook. He didn't raise his hand. A student in front of him whispered, "Maybe Jin Young knows. He looks like he stores extra knowledge in there." Someone laughed. The teacher turned from the board. "Enough." But that was all. Enough never meant stop. It meant continue more quietly. Jin Young lowered his eyes and wrote the correct answer in the margin of his notebook, where no one would see it. He always knew the answer. He had simply decided, a long time ago, that knowing wasn't worth the cost of being seen to know. When the lunch bell rang, the classroom emptied fast. Jin Young waited until the doorway cleared before standing. He checked the zipper on his bag once before leaving. Inside that bag was his sketchbook. It was the only thing in school he cared about protecting. The cafeteria smelled of rice, soup, and fried oil, and it was already full when he arrived. Jin Young took his tray and scanned for a table where no one would have to make a visible decision about whether to sit beside him. That was another rule. Never make anyone choose. He found a spot near the side wall and sat alone. For almost 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then Dae-hyun saw him. Dae-hyun was the kind of student teachers called energetic because rude was harder to write in reports. He walked over with two boys behind him, moving like he had found something that would make the afternoon more interesting. "Jin Young," he said. "I was worried." Jin Young looked at his food. "I thought maybe the cafeteria ran out before you got here." The boys behind him laughed. Jin Young picked up his spoon. "Don't ignore me," Dae-hyun said. "That's impolite." "I'm eating," Jin Young said. Dae-hyun widened his eyes like he was performing shock for an audience. "He speaks." One of the boys tapped Jin Young's tray. "What's in the bag?" Jin Young's hand moved before he could stop it, gripping the strap. Dae-hyun noticed immediately. He always noticed what you wanted him not to. "Oh," he said. "That's important." "It's nothing." "Then show us nothing." "No." The word came out too firm. The table nearby went quieter. Dae-hyun's expression changed. The performance stopped, and something colder replaced it. He reached for the bag. Jin Young stood fast, his knee hitting the underside of the table. The tray jumped. Soup spilled across the plastic surface and dripped onto his uniform. Students turned. More turned after that. Daehyun lifted both hands, performing innocence for the crowd. Relax, I didn't touch you. The laughter started in pieces, a girl covering her mouth, a boy at the next table leaning over to get a better look. Jin Young felt the heat of the soup soaking into his shirt. Then the cold. Daehyun looked down at the mess. You should be more careful. Jin Young picked up the tray with both hands. From somewhere near the windows, a voice said, "He's going to cry." He didn't. That was the one victory he could still control. He carried the tray to the return area, dumped the food, and wiped his hands on a napkin that tore between his fingers. Behind him, the cafeteria went back to being loud. That was always the worst part. Not that they laughed, that they forgot so quickly. Jin Young left through the side door and walked until the cafeteria noise became dull. He stopped near the stairwell at the end of the corridor, where thin light came through narrow windows and no one had a reason to pass unless they were also hiding from something. He sat on the lowest step. Then he opened his bag. The sketchbook was still there. Clean. Safe. He rested it on his knees and opened to the middle pages, and Hyosan High disappeared. On the paper were machines, precise, functional, built with purpose. Compact rescue units with articulated arms. Lightweight structures designed to move through collapsed buildings and flooded streets. Robots built not to fight, but to reach people when humans couldn't. On the left page, a search and rescue unit designed for earthquake debris. On the right, a sensor array so detailed it looked like something from a patent filing. Jin Young had never shown this to anyone, not because the drawings weren't good, because he had learned not to give people more to laugh at. He was shading a mechanical hand joint when a voice came from above him. That hand wouldn't hold. He froze. A girl stood halfway down the stairs. He had never seen her before. She wore the Hyosan High uniform, but with the particular indifference of someone who had not chosen to be here and was not going to pretend otherwise. Her hair was tied back loosely, and her bag hung from one shoulder. She was looking at the page, not at his face. Jin Young shut the sketchbook. The sound was too loud in the stairwell. The girl blinked, then looked at him. I didn't mean it badly. It's nothing. You draw nothing with hydraulics? He didn't answer. She stepped down one stair, then stopped, leaving space between them that felt intentional. I'm Claire. Claire Williams. Jin Young held the sketchbook against his chest. She waited. Most people filled silence immediately. They couldn't stand it. Claire didn't seem bothered by it at all, as if she had decided that silence wasn't her problem to solve. Finally, he said, Jin Young. I know. His eyes sharpened. Not like that, she said. I heard someone say your name in the cafeteria. His shoulders tightened. She understood what that meant, without him having to explain it. They were proud of themselves, she said. Jin Young gave a short, humorless breath. They usually are. Claire studied him for a moment, not with pity, which would have been unbearable, but with the focused expression of someone trying to understand the exact shape of a situation. Then she nodded toward the sketchbook. The finger joints are too thin for the load weight, but the wrist rotation design is smart. It would move cleanly. Jin Young looked down before he could stop himself. You know machines? A little. My father designs medical equipment. I know enough to be annoying. He almost smiled. Almost. Claire saw it and didn't reach for it. Footsteps in the hallway outside. Jin Young moved immediately, stepped to the side, positioning himself out of the sightline of the door before anyone appeared. Two students passed the stairwell entrance without looking in. When they were gone, Claire said, "You do that a lot." "What?" "Move before people ask you to." Jin Young looked away. "It's easier." "For them?" "For everyone." The bell rang. Jin Young put the sketchbook away. Claire adjusted her bag strap. "Are you going back to class?" "Yes." "Good. I don't know where mine is." She held up a folded schedule. "First day. I've already been lost twice. A teacher pointed left and I ended up at the gym." He looked at the paper despite himself. "Room 304, third floor, other wing." "Is that far?" "Not if you don't follow your teacher's directions." Claire's mouth curved slightly. "There it is." "What?" "You're funny." He looked down immediately. "No, I'm not." "You are quite funny." He didn't know what to say to that. No one had said it before. Not like that. Not like it was simply a fact they had noticed. They walked up the stairs, not together exactly, but not apart either. At the third floor, Jin Young pointed down the hall. 304 is there." Claire looked, then looked back. "Thanks." He turned to leave. "Jin Young." He stopped. Claire stood near the railing, calm and direct. "Your drawings aren't nothing." His hand tightened on the bag strap. He couldn't answer. Not because he didn't want to. Because he had been told the opposite, in small ways, for so long that agreement required more than a moment to arrive at. So he walked away. By the time classes ended, the sky had turned pale grey. Jin Young moved with the crowd toward the main exit, maintaining his usual distance from everyone. Near the lockers, Hana Seo stood with her friends, beautiful in the way that made teachers speak to her differently, and students adjust their posture when she walked in. Jin Young passed without looking. "Hey, Soup Boy." He kept walking. Dae-hyun from behind. "Your uniform dry yet?" A few people laughed. His face burned, but his pace stayed even. He reached the front hall. The glass doors were open, cold air coming through. And then something shifted. Students near the entrance turned their heads. Claire Williams stood at the doorway, reading the crowded space, the way someone reads a room they haven't decided to trust yet. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" Another voice answered, "Transfer student." A third, "She's pretty." A fourth, uncertain, "She's foreign." Claire heard enough of it to understand what was happening. She didn't smile for them. She didn't shrink either. Her eyes moved across the hallway, past the boys adjusting their posture, past the girls pretending not to stare, past Hannah, who noticed the attention shifting and slowly closed the small mirror she'd been holding. Then Claire's gaze reached Jin Young. He looked away first. Of course he did. But when he took another step toward the exit, he realized something strange. Claire was walking toward him. Not toward the students near the door trying to be noticed. Not toward the teachers. Toward him. Dae-hyun noticed. "What is this?" He muttered to no one. Jin Young stopped because he didn't know what else to do. Claire reached him, stopped beside him, not in front, not behind, and said, "Do you take the bus?" He stared at her. "What?" "The bus. I'm trying not to end up at the gym again." A quiet laugh came from somewhere nearby. Jin Young heard it. Claire did too. She turned her head just enough toward the sound to show she knew where it came from, then looked back at him. "Well?" "Yes," he said. "Good." She adjusted her bag. "Walk with me." The hallway watched them leave. Jin Young could feel every set of eyes. His first instinct was to say no, not because he wanted to, but because standing near him was dangerous in a way she hadn't learned yet. He knew what came after moments like this. He had survived enough of them to know the exact shape of the aftermath. But Claire was already moving, slowly enough that following didn't require a decision, just a step. So he took it. They walked through the front doors together. Behind them, whispers started immediately. His name, hers, confusion, recalibration. Claire didn't turn back. At the steps outside the entrance, she looked toward the street. Left or right? Jin Young pointed left. Then left. They walked down the steps. For the first time all day, Jin Young didn't know which rule to follow, so he followed her. The walk to the bus stop was supposed to be unremarkable. He could feel the attention trailing them, conversations dipping as they passed, voices that didn't bother lowering. Is she serious? Why him? She just got here. Jin Young kept his eyes forward. He heard everything. He always did. Claire walked like the noise belonged to the background, not to her. That difference, the absolute absence of self-consciousness, unsettled him more than the whispers themselves. When they reached the bus stop, Jin Young positioned himself near the edge of the small crowd out of habit. Claire stopped when he did, scanned the group with the efficiency of someone mapping a new space. "Is this the right one?" she asked. "Yes." She looked at the other students waiting, then back at him. "Do they always do that?" "Do what?" "Talk about people like they're not there." He hesitated. "They're not talking about you." Claire held his gaze. "That's not true." He didn't argue. The bus arrived, and the group shifted forward. Jin Young stepped aside automatically, calculating how long to wait before boarding. Claire was already on. She paused just inside the door, not blocking anyone, just present long enough that he had to choose. He stepped forward and got on. They moved down the aisle. A Jin Young headed for his usual window seat. Claire sat beside him without asking. For a while, neither spoke. Outside, buildings passed in uneven patterns. "This place feels loud," she said. "It's normal." "For you?" "It wasn't always." She turned her head. What changed? He looked at his reflection in the glass. "People decide things early." "About what?" "About you. And once they decide, it doesn't matter if they're wrong." Claire looked forward again. "That sounds like a waste." The simplicity of it caught him off guard. He let out a quiet breath, something that would have been a laugh if it had gone slightly further. Claire noticed, but said nothing. The bus slowed, and more students climbed on. One of them spotted Jin Young and Claire immediately. "Wow," the boy said, loud enough for several rows. "You upgraded fast." Laughter from a few seats. Jin Young's gaze dropped to the floor. Claire looked at the boy directly. "Do you usually talk to people like that?" The boy blinked. "Relax, it's a joke." "Then it should be funny." The laughter died. The boy looked around for backup, found none, and looked away. The moment ended, not with confrontation, but with a quiet loss of confidence on his side. The bus continued. Jin Young kept his voice low. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." When they reached his stop, he stood. Claire stood too. "This is yours?" she asked. "Yes." She stepped off with him without asking permission. Outside, the air was cooler and quieter. Jin Young stopped after a few steps. "I go this way." She glanced in the direction he indicated, then back at him. "Same time tomorrow?" she said. "What?" "The bus." "You don't have to. People will talk." Claire gave him a look that was almost amused. "They already are." "That doesn't bother you?" It's not efficient to care about things that don't change anything. He almost smiled again, for the second time in one afternoon. Tomorrow, she said, stepping back. Don't be late. She turned and walked away without waiting for an answer. Jin Young stood there longer than he intended. Then he went home. The next morning, nothing at Hyosan High had visibly changed, but the way people looked at him had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. In the hallway. Did you see yesterday? Why is she with him? Maybe she's bored. Near the lockers, Hannah Seo watched him pass with a quiet focus, like something had appeared in her field of vision that didn't fit its category. In class, someone behind him said, "Where's your girlfriend?" And a few people laughed. Jin Young kept his eyes on his notebook. Halfway through the lesson, the door opened. "Sorry," Claire said to the teacher. "I took the wrong hallway." The teacher gestured toward the open seats. There were several. Claire walked past all of them. She stopped beside Jin Young's desk. "What page?" 48. "Thanks." She opened her notebook and began writing, not adjusting, not performing, as if the situation required no particular management. From the corner of his eye, Jin Young saw Hannah turn slightly in her seat. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to observe. "You're tense," Claire said quietly. "I'm fine." "You're not." "It's nothing." She tapped her pen lightly against the desk. "You say that a lot." He didn't respond. She let the silence sit. When the bell rang, she was already moving. "Let's go." "Where?" "Lunch." He followed. In the cafeteria, Claire picked up a tray. Jin Young did the same. "Where do you usually sit?" she asked. He pointed toward the side wall. Claire glanced at it, then shook her head slightly. "Not today." She started toward the center of the room. "Claire." She turned back and just looked at him. Not pushing, not pulling, just waiting to see what he would do. Every eye in the cafeteria was already starting to find them. Jin Young walked toward her. They sat in the middle of the room. Across the cafeteria, Dae-hyun noticed immediately. Hana, seated with her group, noticed too, though she showed it differently. Claire began eating. Jin Young didn't. "You're not eating," she said. "I will." "Then eat." He picked up his spoon. His hand was steady, which surprised him. Dae-hyun stood and crossed the room. Jin Young saw it early. Claire followed his gaze. "Same one?" she asked. "Yes." "Good." Dae-hyun stopped at their table, looking between them with the expression of someone discovering a disruption they hadn't authorized. "What's going on here?" Claire looked up from her food. "We're eating." "Funny?" Claire didn't respond to that. "You think you're clever," Dae-hyun said. "I think you're predictable." The surrounding tables went quieter. Dae-hyun stiffened. "You just got here. You don't know how things work." "Then explain it." "You don't sit here with him." "Why not?" "Because that's how it is." Claire nodded slowly. "That's not an explanation." "It's the rule." "Then it's a bad rule." Dae-hyun looked at Jin Young. "Are you going to say anything?" The familiar pressure settled in Jin Young's chest. "Stay quiet. End it." That was how it had always worked. You absorbed it, and it moved on. But Claire hadn't moved. "No," Jin Young said. Dae-hyun leaned slightly forward. "Say that again." "No." Not louder. But it held. For a moment, no one laughed. Not because they agreed with Jin Young, because they didn't know what to do with him yet. Dae-hyun stepped back, the laughter he'd been counting on failing to arrive. "This is going to be fun," he said, and walked away. Claire picked up her spoon again. See? She said. Jin Young exhaled. That was not better. She looked at him. It will be. And she didn't move. Later that same week, Hana Seo came herself. She stopped at their table during lunch with the specific deliberateness of someone who had decided exactly how this conversation would unfold before she crossed the room. She didn't look at Jin Young first. She looked at Claire. "You're new?" she said. "Yes. You don't know how things work here." Claire set her tray down with the same calm precision she used for everything. "That seems to be the main concern." Hana didn't smile. "It should be." "Then explain it." A brief pause. "You don't sit here with him." "Why not?" "Because it lowers you." No emphasis, no attempt to wound, just a statement presented as fact, which made it land harder than cruelty would have. Claire didn't react immediately. She looked at Hannah the way she looked at a problem she was deciding how to describe. "Lower than what?" Hannah's composure tightened slightly. "Jo, you understand what I mean." "No," Claire said. "I don't think I do." This was different from Dae-hyun. Dae-hyun was loud and careless. Hana was controlled and precise, and that made every word weigh more. "People are watching you," she said. "What you choose sets a standard. That matters here." For who? For everyone. That assumes they're paying attention for the right reasons. "They don't need the right reasons," Hana replied. "They just need a reason." Jin Young kept his eyes on the table, but he could feel the surrounding conversations thinning. Not stopping, just becoming aware of themselves. "And this is yours?" Claire asked. "This is how things stay in order." "Order based on what?" Hana's gaze moved to Jin Young briefly, then back. "On knowing where people belong." Claire followed that glance. "And you decided that?" "No, everyone did." Claire's expression didn't change. "Then everyone is wrong." That was the first moment the balance shifted. Not loudly, not with drama. Hana had been speaking from certainty, and Claire had removed the ground under it. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," Hana said. "You're making it simpler than it is." Hana stepped slightly closer. "You think this is about him? It's not. It's about you. People decide who you are based on what you accept." Claire held her gaze. "Then they should pay more attention." Hana exhaled, her patience thinning. "You won't last." "That's not your decision?" For a moment, neither moved. Then Hana looked at Jin Young, not with cruelty, but with a measuring kind of attention, as if she was trying to understand how someone like him had become part of an equation that wasn't supposed to include him. She stepped back and walked away. The cafeteria took longer to resume after that. The conversations that returned were more careful than before. Jin Young sat still. "You shouldn't have said that," he said quietly. "Which part?" "All of it." Claire looked at him. "Would you have preferred I agreed with her?" "That's not the point." "Then what is?" He looked at his tray, then back at her. "You don't have to keep doing this, sitting here, walking with me." "Do you want me to stop?" The question required honesty, so he gave it. "No." "Then I won't." No emphasis, no attempt to make it meaningful, just a decision stated plainly. Jin Young exhaled. Some of the tension left him. The laughter that had always felt automatic in this room no longer did. It hadn't disappeared. It had stopped feeling inevitable. Claire went back to her food. Jin Young picked up his spoon again, this time without hesitation. The attention around them didn't feel like something to survive anymore. It felt like something that had been interrupted. Something was building. Jin Young had spent enough time at the edges of things to recognize the difference between attention and interest. The cafeteria confrontations had produced attention, heads turning, whispers forming, people watching the way they watched anything unusual. But the stairwell had produced something else: interest, the kind that didn't dissipate when the moment was over. Claire was interested in his machines, not as a performance, not to be kind. She looked at his drawings the way someone looks at work they actually understand, and that was something Jin Young had never experienced before. Not once. In this school, in any context, with any person, the stairwell became theirs without anyone naming it. An afternoon, then another, then a third. The hallway noise faded to something distant and manageable once the door closed behind them. Jin Young began to understand that Claire chose this space for the same reason he did. Not because she was hiding from anything, but because she found most spaces exhausting in the way only genuinely observant people do. Rooms full of performance. People working hard at the impression they were making instead of the thing they were supposed to be doing. Here, nothing had to perform. One afternoon, she came in and sat across from him while he worked. Her bag set aside, her notebook unopened. She didn't reach for anything. She watched. "You're adjusting around it," she said after a while. He was working on the sensor array for the search and rescue unit, the one designed to detect heat signatures in earthquake debris. "The orientation is fine." "It's not. The input frequency will interfere with the motor signal if both are running at the same time." He stopped and looked at it. She was right. He hadn't caught it because he'd been moving too fast through that section, concentrating on the structural problem in the preceding layer. "You knew that before I started," he said. "Yes." "Why didn't you say something?" Claire shrugged slightly. "I wanted to see if you'd find it." "Did I?" "No, I had to tell you." She said it without cruelty, the way you state a data point. "But you accepted it immediately instead of defending the wrong answer. That's rarer than it should be." He looked at her. "Do people usually defend wrong answers?" "Constantly." "Why?" "Because being wrong in public costs something here." He was quiet for a moment. "And you don't care about that?" Claire tilted her head slightly. "I care about it less than I care about having accurate information." That was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him inside this building. He looked back at his drawing and made the correction. Over the following days, she stopped treating the drawings like something she was doing him a favor by examining. She asked questions, the real kind, the kind that assumed he had thought carefully about what he was building and expected his answers to be worth hearing, not leading questions designed to guide him somewhere she already knew. Actual questions, asked because she wanted the answer. She pointed out 3 more errors in a single session. He fixed all 3. On the 4th afternoon, she asked about the thermal sensor placement, and he explained it. And she listened. And then she said, "The radius is too conservative. You're worried about false positives, but you're going to miss real signatures at range." He sat with that for a long moment, adjusted it, and she was right, and neither of them made anything of it. That was what struck him most. She didn't take satisfaction in being right. She simply wanted the machine to be as good as it could be, and any contribution toward that goal was worth making. He had never had a collaborator before. He hadn't understood, until now, what he'd been missing. "You should submit these somewhere," she said one afternoon. "No." "To the engineering department at a university, or a robotics competition." "Those are for different kinds of people." She gave the frown she reserved for incorrect data. "Different how?" "People who belong in rooms like that." And you don't? No. The answer came too quickly. Claire looked at him for a long moment, not with frustration or pity, just with the focused attention of someone who has identified a variable they don't understand yet. You built machines designed to find people trapped in earthquake rubble, she said. And you don't think you belong in a room with students building line followers out of kits. It's not about the machines? I know. It's about you deciding in advance who gets to take up space. He looked away. She let the silence sit for a moment, then said, "What's the worst that could happen if you entered?" He almost laughed. "What wouldn't happen?" "That's not an answer. They'd look at me the same way everyone here looks at me. And? And I'd have to sit in it." Claire considered that. Or they'd look at the work. People don't separate those things. Some do. He didn't believe that. But the way she said it, not as reassurance, not as the thing you say to make someone feel better, but as a factual correction, made the certainty harder to hold on to. Like a joint he'd thought was solid that turned out to have movement in it. It was Claire who mentioned the robotics club, not as a suggestion, as a piece of information delivered without emphasis. "There's a showcase at the end of term," she said. "Mr. Kang's club. They're presenting." "I know." "Are you going to submit something?" "No." "You should." "I'm not in the club." "You can join." He turned back to his drawing without answering. She watched him for a moment. Because of how they'd react, or because of how you think they'd react? That was the thing about Claire. She didn't argue with him. She asked the question that made the argument beside the point. He didn't answer. She stood, adjusted her bag. Think about it. He did think about it, more than he wanted to. He thought about it walking home that afternoon. He thought about it during the next morning's lesson when the teacher asked a question and he knew the answer and didn't raise his hand. He thought about it in the way you think about something you've already decided but haven't admitted yet. 3 days later, he went to see Mr. Kang. So the robotics teacher was not warm, and he was not unkind. He was precise, in the way that people who care more about quality than comfort tend to be. He looked at Jin Young's sketchbook for several minutes without speaking, turning pages slowly, stopping at the search and rescue unit and the sensor array. "These are yours?" he asked. "Yes." "You've had instruction?" "No." Mr. Kang looked at him over the top of the open page. "Then how?" Jin Young held his gaze. "I worked at it until it made sense." A long pause. Then Mr. Kang closed the sketchbook and handed it back. "Come on Tuesday. Bring this." That was all. Jin Young told Claire the next morning, in the stairwell, without making anything of it. "He said come Tuesday," he said. Claire looked up from her notebook. "And you're going?" "Yes." She went back to writing. Good. No celebration, no performance. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a decision that had been made correctly. That was what he liked most about her. She didn't make him feel like his wins were surprising. She didn't make him feel like his existence in spaces that were supposed to exclude him was a miracle or a disruption. She made it feel like the natural consequence of a correct decision, which was all it had ever been. He went on Tuesday. The robotics lab turned out to be exactly what he had expected, and nothing like what he had feared. The equipment was better than his bag and a borrowed pencil. The space was serious, which suited him. The other students, there were 7 of them, were not cruel in the way the rest of the school was. They simply had an existing order that he was not part of, and that order expressed itself in small architectural ways. Who explained things to whom? Who was expected to already know? Who received feedback? And who received silence? Jin Young had been invisible long enough to read a room's hierarchy without needing to see it stated. He worked at the edge of a table. He didn't push for inclusion. He didn't perform capability. He simply worked, and let the work be what it was. Claire came sometimes. She never touched the equipment. She watched, and occasionally said something precise and quiet that Jin Young absorbed without acknowledging loudly, because doing otherwise would have required explaining their dynamic to people who hadn't earned the explanation. Mr. Kang walked past his table one afternoon and stopped. "Your alignment is drifting." Jin Young had already corrected it. He showed him. Mr. Kang said, and walked on. That was the closest to approval the man gave. 2 weeks before the showcase, Mr. Kang called him over. "You'll present?" "I've only been here 3 weeks. And I'm not ready." Mr. Kang considered him with the expression of someone who had stopped accepting excuses as inputs. "Readiness isn't the difference between the ones presenting and the ones watching," he said. "You either build or you don't. Everything else is decoration." He walked away before Jin Young could respond. "Bring something that works," he said over his shoulder, "not something that performs." The night before the showcase, Jin Young did something he hadn't done before. He slowed down. He had already passed the threshold most people would stop at. The machine responded, completed its function, held under stress. It worked. But he sat with it and let it fail deliberately. Once, then again. Not to fix it immediately, to understand the pattern behind each failure, where the structure gave way, where it held when it shouldn't have. He adjusted less than he observed. By the time he stepped back, the machine hadn't become perfect. It had become something he understood completely. That mattered more than perfect. The auditorium held its usual layered noise, conversations folding over each other, people moving, the low hum of an event that hadn't started yet. Jin Young stood backstage with the others, his project on the table in front of him. The other students rehearsed their lines quietly, repeating the same phrasing until it stopped meaning anything. Jin Young did neither. He stood with his hands resting lightly on the table and listened to the pattern of the presentations beyond the curtain, not to the content, but to the gaps, the pause before applause, the moments where confidence slipped and was recovered too quickly. That told him more than any demonstration. When his name was called, he carried his project to the stage and waited for the lights to settle. "My project is designed for structural access in unstable environments." He didn't try to elevate it with language. He described the function, the limits, the conditions it was built for, and, deliberately, the conditions it wasn't. When he reached the failure points, something happened in the room. The slight shifting posture, the sharpening attention, the change that comes when someone says something honest in a room where honesty is usually dressed up. He ran the demonstration. Midway through, the mechanism stalled. A few students straightened. A teacher leaned forward. The room prepared itself to watch a recovery. Jin Young didn't rush. He didn't cover it. He adjusted the alignment in full view, quietly, with the same pace he would have used alone in the lab. "Tolerance issue," he said, as if it had always been scheduled. He reset the system and ran it again. The second run completed exactly as it was designed to. The silence afterward was a beat longer than the others had been. Then the applause came. Not the performed kind, the kind that arrives because something has been seen clearly. Jin Young stepped back without acknowledging it. No pause, no gesture. He left the stage the same way he entered. Backstage, he stood beside his table, one hand resting on the machine. He thought about the corridor at the beginning of the year. the soup on his uniform. Dae-hyun's hands held up in performed innocence, the laughter that had resumed before he reached the exit. He thought about a stairwell and a voice from halfway up the stairs. He thought about the cafeteria, the center of the room, his hand steady on the spoon. He had not become someone different. He had become more completely what he had always been, and the difference, it turned out, was not minor. You let it break. He turned. Claire stood just behind him, having come through from the audience side. It was already going to break, he said. Most people hide that. They try to fix it before anyone notices. Claire stepped closer, looking at the machine. And you didn't. It works better when I stop pretending it doesn't fail. She studied him for a moment. That's new. He turned to face her. No, I just stopped covering it. She didn't answer immediately. That pause held more than agreement would have. You changed how you explain things, she said. I stopped filling in the parts no one asked about. That's not the same thing. I know. The space between them was quieter than the noise around it. Claire shifted, arms loosely crossed. You could have stepped back from the presentation, she said. I could have. But you didn't. He looked at her. I wanted to see what happens when I don't. Something shifted in her expression, small but registerable. That's not a small decision. It didn't feel like one. She watched him. You're different. No. You are. He looked at her more directly. This is just what happens when I stop waiting. She didn't respond. From the stage, another name was called. The moment settled. Claire adjusted her bag. I have somewhere to be. Okay. She didn't move immediately. Neither did he. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Jin Young stayed where he was, hand on the machine, listening to the muted rhythm of the auditorium beyond the curtain. He was not thinking about what had shifted between them. He was thinking about what hadn't. And that difference, as quiet as it was, felt important. Over the following days, the distance between them didn't resolve. It settled into something that didn't ask for attention. In class, the seat beside him was empty again. Not because Claire was avoiding him. She greeted him, spoke to him, still walked beside him. But the particular closeness of the stairwell, of the shared work over his sketchbook, of her choosing him specifically, that had withdrawn. He understood why. He had said it was temporary. He had said she could leave. He had decided the outcome before it arrived, which was exactly the thing he had always done, and it had worked exactly as it always worked. It made the thing it feared into a fact. The afternoon the distance finally broke. It broke cleanly. They were in the robotics lab, later than the other students. The room had emptied down to just the two of them. Jin Young was working on the same mechanism he had been adjusting for days, and Claire sat nearby, not touching anything, the way she did when she was deciding whether to say something. You're correcting after the mistake. I not before it? She said. That's how adjustments work. Not if you already know where the error is going to happen. He tightened the connection without looking up. I'm fine. You're working like someone is waiting for you to fail. That made him stop, just for a second. Then he resumed, more precisely, but the rhythm had changed. I'm working, he said. That's not the same thing. He pushed his chair back slightly, not abruptly, but with enough force to break the pace of the moment. I don't have time to slow down. Then what are you trying to control? He didn't answer immediately. Then, I need to keep up. With what? With everything. Claire tilted her head slightly. You already are. No. Sharper now. I'm not. She stood. Her posture didn't shift, but her attention did. You walked into this place like none of it mattered, he continued. Like nothing could change. Because it doesn't. It does. Just not to you. That was the moment everything became specific. Not because of what he said, because of how much he believed it. Claire held his gaze. You think this doesn't affect me? He looked at her, then away, then back. I think you can leave whenever you want, he said. Is that what you think? I think you're here because it's temporary. That was when the distance he had built made itself fully visible, not as caution, not as self-protection, but as a decision he had made without asking her if it was accurate. The room didn't change, but the space between them did. Claire nodded once. All right. No anger, no argument. Jin Young felt it immediately, the finality of it. He had created exactly what he had been trying to protect against. That's not what I meant, he said. It's what you said. I didn't mean it like that. She looked at him, not cold, not distant, just clear. It doesn't change anything. Claire, I'm not going to explain myself to you. If you don't see it, you don't. That's not fair. It's accurate. That word stayed. Not cruel, not exaggerated, accurate. She picked up her bag and walked to the door. Jin Young didn't follow immediately. Not because he didn't want to, because for the first time, he didn't know how. By the time he moved, she was already gone. The lab was quiet, in the way spaces are quiet when they've just lost something. He looked at the screen. The error was still there, unchanged, waiting. He understood, suddenly, that it wasn't the problem he had been trying to fix. He packed his bag slowly. When he stepped into the hallway, the school looked exactly the same. Students passing, conversations continuing. But something had changed in a way that wouldn't simply reverse. For the first time since Claire had chosen to sit beside him, Jin Young walked alone. Not because the world had pushed him back, but because, without realizing it, he had. That was almost harder to accept. Things did not go back to what they were before. They became something else, present, functional, and careful in a way that hadn't been necessary before. Claire still spoke to him. She still nodded when they passed in the corridor. She still answered questions in the robotics lab with the same clean precision. But the space that had existed in the stairwell, the particular gravity of her choosing him first, that was gone, and he felt its absence as a specific shape, the way you feel the outline of something that used to be there. He spent 2 weeks understanding exactly what he had done. He had not pushed her away dramatically. He hadn't been cruel or cold. He had simply done what he always did, decided in advance that the good thing wouldn't last, and said so out loud before she had any chance to prove otherwise. He had protected himself from a loss that hadn't happened yet, and in doing so, he had manufactured the exact loss he was afraid of. He saw it clearly now. The clarity wasn't comfortable. He came back to it the afternoon before graduation rehearsal in the robotics lab, and when the room was mostly empty and the remaining light through the windows made everything look like it was already in a photograph. He was reworking the base alignment of his project, not because it needed it, but because working helped him think. When Claire's voice came from across the room, "You're reworking it." He finished the adjustment before responding. "It's not balanced." She came closer, stopping at the edge of the table. "It was balanced yesterday." "It worked yesterday." She glanced at him. "That's not the same thing." "No," he said. "It's not." The silence that followed was not comfortable. It carried everything they hadn't addressed yet. Claire shifted her weight slightly. You didn't look at me after the showcase, she said. I saw you. That's not what I said. He straightened and looked at her directly. I didn't know what you wanted me to do. You decided that without asking. That landed exactly where it needed to. You left, he said. Yes. No hesitation, no defense, just that. A few students moved past the open doorway, their voices low. Claire didn't lower hers. You said I could leave whenever I wanted, she said. So I did. That's not what I meant. You said it. And you believed it? I didn't need to believe it. She held his gaze. You already did. He couldn't answer quickly, so he didn't try to. I wasn't trying to push you away, he said finally. You didn't have to, Claire replied. You already decided I wasn't staying. I didn't mean... You made it sound like I was passing through something that belonged to you. Like I was a temporary presence in your story, and you were just acknowledging the fact before I got there myself. He didn't interrupt this time. Claire's voice was quieter when she continued. I don't stay where I don't mean to. He let that sit. Then, I thought you'd leave once it got harder. Claire let out a small, almost disbelieving breath. It got harder the moment I sat next to you. That was not said lightly. It was a statement of fact that covered everything. Every whisper in the hallway, every confrontation in the cafeteria, every measuring look from Hana, every shifted conversation. She had walked into all of it on purpose, not performing bravery, not proving something, just choosing where she wanted to be and then staying there. He almost smiled, not fully, but enough. Then why didn't you say that? He asked. Claire met his gaze. Why didn't you ask? That was the point where someone could have tried to win the argument. Neither of them did. Jin Young nodded once. All right. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. That's it? For now. The tension didn't disappear. It settled into something more stable. Not resolved, but understood. Claire glanced at the machine. So what's wrong with it? The base shifts under uneven weight. And you're fixing it? Trying to. She leaned closer, studying the structure. You're overcompensating on the left side. He moved his hand. Not there. Further back. He adjusted. Tested it. Better. He looked at her. You still do that? He said. What? See things before I say them? Claire shrugged slightly. You leave them visible. That felt closer to something like normal. Not the same as before. Better. They worked in silence for a while after that. Not separate. Not performing togetherness. Just aligned. By the time they left the lab, the sky was dimming. Students moved through the courtyard in smaller groups, the day already closing. Near the gate, Dae-hyun stood with his group. He looked up when he saw Jin Young and Claire, and something moved in his expression. Still calculating, but with less certainty than before. You're still doing this? He said. Jin Young kept walking. Doing what? You know what I mean. Jin Young slowed just enough to look at him directly. No, I don't. Dae-hyun's jaw tightened. You think one presentation changes anything? Jin Young held his gaze. No, I think it showed something that was already there. Not defensive, not aggressive, just certain. Dae-hyun didn't continue, and there was no easy way to push against something that wasn't pushing back. Jin Young walked past him. Claire followed. At the gate, she slowed slightly. You didn't try to prove anything. He adjusted his bag. I don't think I need to. Claire studied him for a moment. No, you don't. The street outside was quieter than usual. They walked a few steps before she said, "You're leaving." He looked at her. "Yeah. When?" "After graduation." She absorbed this without reacting immediately. "You've known for a while." "Yes." "And you didn't say anything." He looked at her. "I wasn't sure if I should." "That's consistent," she said, and there was something in it that wasn't quite a joke. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" He didn't answer. That was enough. Claire stopped walking. Jin Young stopped too. "You don't get to decide things alone and then call it timing," she said. No anger, just precision. He held her gaze. "I'm not trying to decide alone anymore." That was new. Not just in what he said, but in how he said it, without backing away from it, without the instinctive reach for qualification. Claire watched him for a moment longer. "Good," she said. They stood there, neither moving, the noise of the street passing around them. "Walk me to the bus stop," she said. Not a request, not a command. Just something that didn't need explanation. Jin Young adjusted his bag slightly. "All right." They walked, not rushed, not hesitant. And this time neither of them stepped ahead or held back. Graduation came quietly. Hyosan High looked the same that morning. The same gate, the same courtyard. The same formations of people trying to hold on to something that was already becoming memory. Chairs in neat rows, banners where they always were, teachers moving with the barely suppressed urgency of a day that had to go right. Jin Young moved through it differently than he had moved through any other day in this building. Not avoiding, not waiting, just moving, letting the space around him be what it was. People who had laughed at him 2 months ago were not laughing now. They weren't apologizing either. They had recalibrated. The way people do when something they assumed was fixed turns out to be adjustable. A few of them looked at him now, the way they hadn't at the beginning of the year. With the specific attention you give someone you misjudged. He didn't hold it against them. Understanding had to start somewhere, and starting late was better than not starting. He didn't need more than that. When his name was called, he walked to the stage without looking for confirmation in anyone's face. He took the certificate, stepped down, and returned to his seat. Clean, unsentimentalized. But not nothing. It was not nothing. He had walked in here at the beginning of the year, knowing where the exits were, and counting the steps between himself and the nearest door. He was leaving, knowing exactly what he was capable of, and having one person in his corner who had known it before he did. That was everything. Afterward, the structure of the ceremony broke into noise and movement. Jin Young stood just outside the main gathering, not isolated, just at the edge. "You're leaving tomorrow." Claire's voice. He turned. She was a few steps away, closer than their careful distance would have predicted. "Yeah. You packed?" "Mostly." She nodded. "You always finish things before they end." He glanced at her. "Not always." Claire held his gaze. "No, not always." A group passed behind them, loud for a moment, then gone. "You're not coming back," she said. "I don't know." "That means no." He didn't argue. She exhaled slowly, like she had worked through that part privately before today. "You should have told me earlier." "I know." "You didn't." "No." The words sat between them. Simple, but carrying everything they hadn't argued about before. Claire stepped closer, not closing the distance completely, but changing the way they stood. "For someone who said he wasn't deciding things alone anymore." Jin Young nodded once. "Yeah." He looked at her properly then. "I didn't know how to say it without making it sound like I was leaving you behind." "You are," she said. I know. You don't get to just walk away like that, she said, quieter now. I'm not walking away. You are. I'm moving forward. And I'm not part of that? He stepped closer, closing the space she'd left open. You are. Claire held his gaze. That's not how it sounds. Because I didn't say it properly. Then say it now. He didn't immediately, not because he didn't know what to say, because saying it meant not being able to unsay it, and that was new territory. The territory of someone who reaches for things instead of waiting for them to be safe. I didn't want to ask you to stay, he said. Not here. Not like this. That's not what I'm asking. I know. He exhaled. But I didn't want to pretend I wasn't leaving either. The space between them tightened. Claire looked at him, not for a reaction, but for the thing underneath. You always do that? She said. What? Decide what something means before it happens. He almost smiled. Not this time. She searched his face for hesitation. Didn't find it. Then what are you saying? She asked. He didn't look away. I'm leaving. But I'm not ending this. The words were not dramatic. They didn't try to be. They were just true, stated plainly, in the exact way she had always taught him to state things. Claire let out a quiet breath, something between disbelief and relief. That's not very clear. I know. A pause. Then she said, Stay. Not here. Not at the school. Just stay. He stepped closer, but close enough that the space between them stopped being a space. I am. Something finally gave, not loudly, not in a way anyone watching would have marked as significant, but enough. Claire shook her head slightly, like she wasn't fully ready to believe him, and didn't fully need to. You're still terrible at this, she said. Yeah. She looked at him for another second. Then she reached for him. It wasn't tentative. Her hand caught his first, and she pulled him forward the way people move when they've already made the decision and are just arriving at it physically. Jin Young's hand settled against her back, holding her there steadily, not like someone about to step back. The noise of graduation continued around them, irrelevant. Claire pulled back just enough to see his face. You don't get to disappear. I won't. You said that before. I mean it now. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she nodded. Good. When she stepped back, her hand stayed in his a moment longer before letting go. Walk me out, she said. They moved through the crowd together. People noticed. They always would. Jin Young had stopped being the person who moved so carefully around that fact that it governed his every step. At the gate where he had always stopped, where he had always watched people keep moving while he held back. Claire slowed. This is where you usually stop, she said. Jin Young looked at her. Not today. She held his gaze. Then she smiled, real, unheld. The smile of someone who had been watching carefully for a long time and had finally seen what she was looking for. Good. The next morning came without ceremony, no one waiting to see him off. No dramatic last look at the school building. Jin Young moved through the day the way he intended to move through everything that came next. Steady, without waiting for permission, without checking whether the ground would hold before putting weight on it. He boarded a flight to San Francisco. He did not look back. 10 years. In the time between, Jin Young did not disappear. He built things. First in university in San Francisco, where the professors who mattered recognized the sketchbook drawings he had been making since 16 and treated them with the seriousness they deserved. Then in labs. Then in companies. And then in the space between companies where the most interesting work gets done. The gaps where no one has solved something yet, and the only qualification is the willingness to stay until it's solved. He grew into himself. That was the thing no one who had known him at Hyosan High would have predicted, and every single one of them would have recognized immediately if they'd seen him now. The boy who had moved through corridors, taking up the least possible space, had become a man who took up exactly the space he needed, and not a centimetre more. The weight he had carried since adolescence had resolved, not disappeared, but shaped into something else entirely. He was broad-shouldered and lean now, with the particular stillness that doesn't come from trying to disappear, but from having nothing left to prove. The face that hadn't known what it wanted to be had found its answer over years of California sun and late-night labs, and the specific confidence that comes from doing difficult work well. Clean lines. A jaw that carried authority without effort. Eyes that still held the quality he'd always had. Watching more carefully than you thought. He had not gone looking for any of this. He had simply stopped hiding from it. The first time he walked into a room full of senior engineers and felt them register his presence. Not with suspicion, not with the adjustment that comes before someone is dismissed, but with the attention reserved for people whose work has preceded them. He understood that something had changed in a way that wasn't reversible. Not because he'd changed how he carried himself, because he'd stopped carrying something he shouldn't have been carrying in the first place. He became, quietly and without announcement, the kind of man that rooms adjusted for. He spoke at conferences. He published. He answered questions from younger engineers with the same directness Claire had used in a stairwell a decade ago. Here is the error. Here is the correction. Here is what would make this work. Not gentle, not harsh, just accurate. The people who learned from him said later that he made them feel like their mistakes were data, not failures. He recognized that approach. He had not invented it. He did not forget Hyosan High. He did not try to. It had stopped being a wound and become something more like a formation, the way a broken bone heals stronger at the fracture point. The particular suffering of being seen a certain way before you have any power to change it had made him permanently allergic to pretending, to performing capability instead of having it, to filling in explanations no one had asked for, to moving before someone asked him to. All of that was gone. What remained was simpler and better. He worked. He thought. He built things that found people in the dark. The search and rescue units he had designed in a sketchbook at 16 were now being prototyped by a team of 12 in a building in the Mission District that had his name on the funding documents. And sometimes, in the specific silence of a late night in the lab, when everyone else had gone home, and the only light was the workbench lamp and the glow of a running simulation, he thought about a stairwell and a girl who had looked at a mechanical hand and said the thing no one else had said. Your drawings aren't nothing. He thought about her more than he told himself he did. More than was rational for a person he had known for less than a year. At 16, in a school neither of them had chosen to be in. He kept her in the category of things he was not going to examine too closely, because examining them would require deciding what they meant, and deciding what they meant would require doing something about it, and doing something about it would require being the kind of person who reached for things instead of waiting. He was becoming that person, slowly, year by year. He just hadn't finished becoming him yet. The conference was in San Francisco in early October, which meant the city was still carrying the last of summer in the late afternoon light, and the conference hall was full of the particular energy of people who were doing the exact work they had chosen to do and were surrounded by others doing the same. Jin Young moved through it easily, not trying to fit, already placed. He was reviewing the next morning's presentation notes near the far edge of the hall, away from the main currents of conversation, when someone said his name. He turned. Claire Williams stood 10 feet away. Not a memory, not the girl from the stairwell, preserved the way you preserve someone you've kept at a distance for a decade. A woman. Same directness in her eyes, same unhurried quality of attention, same way of standing like she had already decided what the room was and was comfortable with what she'd found. She had grown into herself the way he had, not dramatically, but completely. There was an ease to her now that hadn't been present at 16, when ease had required effort. This was something that had simply become true. For a second, neither of them moved. Not because they didn't know what to do, because after 10 years and one gate and one hand held briefly, and one long flight, and all the days between, there was no script for this. Just two people who had known each other before they were finished becoming themselves, and were now finished, and were standing in the same room. Jin Young spoke first. "You didn't disappear." Claire's mouth curved. "You took 10 years to prove you wouldn't either." She stepped closer, not hesitant, not performing the reunion, just moving toward him with the same quality she had always had, directness that came from having already decided. "You're presenting?" she asked. "Tomorrow." "I'll be there." A pause. Full, not empty. The kind of quiet that only exists between people who have enough history together that silence isn't something to fill. "You kept building," she said. He looked at her. "So did you." She was a researcher now. He had known this, had known it in the distant, deliberate way of someone who is tracking something from a distance, because getting closer would require acknowledging what they were doing. Medical technology, the space where engineering and human need intersected. Her father's world, pursued in her own way. She had done it without him watching, and she had done it completely. That was no surprise. "You look different," she said, and he raised an eyebrow slightly. "Good different," Claire said. "Don't make it strange." He almost laughed. "I wasn't." "You were about to." She was right. The particular defensive instinct of the boy he had been was still there, somewhere, in the reflex, the reaching for deflection before a compliment could land. He let it pass. "So do you," he said. Claire looked at him steadily. "You got better at saying things." "A little." She tilted her head slightly. "A lot." They stood for a moment. Around them, the conference moved with its purpose, conversations forming and resolving, panels starting in the distance, the low ambient noise of a room full of people doing the specific work they had chosen. None of it was what either of them was paying attention to. "I thought about you," Jin Young said. "More than I told myself I did." Claire's expression didn't shift dramatically. She absorbed it with the same precision she gave everything. "I know." "How?" "Because you stopped coming to things like this." She glanced around the room. "You went to the smaller venues, the precise ones. I thought maybe you were avoiding something." He looked at her. "I was." "Me?" "The version of myself I'd have to be honest about. If you were there." A pause. She held his gaze. "That's very honest," she said. "I told you. I got better." Something shifted in her expression then. Something that had been carefully managed for the length of their interaction loosening slightly, becoming less composed and more real. "I kept the sketchbook," she said. He stilled. "What?" "You left a copy, one of the photocopied pages, from when we were trying to figure out the sensor array. You left it on the table in the stairwell." She paused. "I kept it." Jin Young looked at her. The conference noise had become, at some point, entirely irrelevant. He thought about a 16-year-old girl sitting in a stairwell telling a boy his drawings weren't nothing, and meaning it. Not as kindness, not as performance, but as a factual correction of an inaccurate statement. He thought about a cafeteria in the center of the room, and a bench outside a classroom door, and a stairwell that became quiet in the right way. He thought about a gate at Hyosan High, and a hand in his, brief and certain, and the long flight west the next morning toward a life that was, for the first time, entirely his own to build. He had built it, and all through the building, through every late night and every design revision and every room that shifted when he walked in, something had persisted at the back of things. Not an ache, not a longing, just a presence. The memory of someone who had looked at him once before he was finished and had decided he was worth looking at. "Why did you keep it?" he asked. Claire looked at him steadily. "Because it was yours, and because what you built with it was real. I wanted to remember that someone started here. A stairwell at Hyosan High. A boy in a stairwell who thought his drawings were nothing." He looked at her. "They weren't." "No," she said. "They weren't." The space between them had narrowed, not because either of them had moved dramatically, but because something that had been held carefully between them for a very long time had been set down, gently, without being forced. "I looked for you," she said. "A few years ago. I thought about reaching out." "Why didn't you?" Claire tilted her head slightly. "Because I wanted to see who you'd become first, before I asked anything of you." That was very much her. The patience of it. The deliberateness. "And?" he said. She looked at him. The full, unhurried look he remembered from the stairwell. The one that wasn't searching for a reaction, but simply seeing what was there. "You became someone I wanted to know." That was the sentence. That was the one that crossed the distance 10 years had built. Not dramatically, not with music. Just two people in a conference hall in San Francisco, both of them finally arrived at the same place. A Jin Young stepped closer. Not dramatically, just closing the distance that no longer made sense between them. "Walk with me," he said. Claire looked at him for a moment. That measuring look, the one that calculated not out of caution, but out of genuine interest in seeing accurately. Then she smiled, not careful, not held back. Real and full, and exactly what the moment required. The smile of someone who had been waiting to be certain before allowing herself to be happy, and was now certain. "All right," she said. They walked. And this time there was no hallway watching, no rules to navigate, no hierarchy to interrupt, no version of themselves that had to be managed or protected or performed. Just two people who had found each other twice. Once when they were becoming something, and once when they had become it. And who were, finally, starting from the right place. He didn't reach for her hand immediately. He didn't need to perform certainty he actually had. She reached for his, and the gravity that had existed in a stairwell at Hyosan High, in a cafeteria in the center of the room, in a gate where one of them always used to stop, that gravity had not disappeared over 10 years. It had simply been waiting for them to arrive at it together. Outside the conference hall, San Francisco in October held the last of its warmth in the afternoon light, golden and unhurried. The kind of light that makes everything look like it was always going to arrive here. Jin Young held her hand. He was not the boy from Hyosan High anymore. He was not the boy who moved through corridors taking up the least possible space, who chose seats near the back so he could be forgotten, who knew every answer and wrote it in the margins where no one would see. He was someone who had been built slowly and without ceremony, by doing the work and letting the work be what it was. And she was here, and he was not letting go. This time, neither of them was going to step back. This time, they were staying.